He called it garbage. Right in front of me. My son-in-law picked up the quilt I spent 18 months making, 18 months of my life stitched into every square, looked at it for maybe 3 seconds and said, "This is garbage." And my daughter sat there and said nothing. I don't think I've ever felt pain like that. Not when my husband died, not when I buried my mother, because at least then I knew they loved me. At least then I wasn't standing in a room wondering if the person I gave my whole life to ever respected me at all. I made that quilt with pieces of our family, my husband's flannel shirt, the one he wore every Sunday for 20 years, my mother's wedding veil, the baby blanket I brought my daughter home from the hospital in. I sewed them together because I wanted her to feel surrounded by love. I wanted her to know that even though so many people we loved were gone, they were still with her, still keeping her warm. I worked on it every single day. My hands ached, my eyes gave out halfway through, and I had to get new glasses. But I didn't stop, because it was for her, because I thought she'd understand what it meant. I wrapped it in tissue paper, tied it with a ribbon, drove it to her house with my heart so full I could barely breathe. And the man she married looked at it like I'd handed him a dirty rag. But that's not what broke me. What broke me was watching my daughter, my baby, the girl I would have died for without hesitation, sit there in silence while he said it. She didn't defend me. She didn't tell him he was wrong. She didn't even look uncomfortable. She just folded the quilt, set it on the arm of the couch, and asked if I wanted to stay for dinner, like nothing happened, like my heart wasn't lying shattered on her living room floor. I said no. I left. I sat in my car in her driveway and cried so hard I thought I might be sick. And that night, alone in my house, I realized something I'd been trying not to see for a very long time. I wish I could tell you that moment was the worst of it. But what I found out later made that day look like kindness. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying it in my head, over and over, the way he said it, the way she didn't react, the way I just stood there like a fool, waiting for someone to tell me I mattered. I've never been the kind of woman who needs constant validation. I raised my daughter mostly on my own after my husband died. And I worked 2 jobs for years just to keep the lights on and food on the table. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for help. I just did what needed to be done. But that night, lying in my bed staring at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Small. Like everything I'd ever done, everything I'd ever given didn't mean a thing. And the worst part, I couldn't even be angry yet. I was still too hurt, still too confused, still trying to make sense of how the little girl who used to crawl into my lap and tell me I was the best mommy in the whole world could sit there and let someone treat me like that. I wanted to call her. I picked up my phone at least a dozen times, but every time I started to dial, I stopped, because I was afraid that if I called and asked her why she didn't say anything, she'd tell me I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic, that I was making a big deal out of nothing, and I didn't think I could survive hearing that. So I didn't call. I just lay there in the dark and asked myself 3 questions I couldn't answer. The first one was this: what did they really think of me? Not what they said to my face at holidays or when they needed something, but what did they say about me when I wasn't there? When it was just the 2 of them behind closed doors, what words did they use to describe me? Did they roll their eyes when I called? Did they groan when I invited them over? Did they laugh at the things I made, the things I cared about, the life I'd lived? I didn't know, and not knowing felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. And the second question was worse. How long has this been going on? Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized that moment in the living room wasn't new. It didn't come out of nowhere. You don't just wake up one day and decide to disrespect someone like that. It builds, it grows. It starts small and quiet, and then one day it slips out in front of the wrong person. So how long had he been talking about me like that? And how long had she been letting him? Weeks? Months? Years? The third question was the one that scared me the most. What am I going to do now? Because I couldn't pretend I didn't see it anymore. I couldn't unsee the look on his face. I couldn't unhear the silence that followed. I couldn't unfeel the weight of realizing that my own daughter valued his comfort more than my dignity. So what was I supposed to do? Cut her off? Walk away from the only family I had left? Or swallow it? Smile? Keep showing up to Sunday dinners and pretending everything was fine just so I didn't lose her completely? I didn't have an answer, and lying there in that dark bedroom, I felt more alone than I had in my entire life. But here's what I need you to understand before I go any further. I'm not telling you this story because I want you to feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this because I know some of you have been exactly where I was that night. You've given everything to someone, your time, your money, your heart, your dignity. And then one day you realized they didn't see it as love. They saw it as weakness. You've sat in the dark asking yourself if you imagined it, if maybe you're too sensitive, if maybe you deserved it. And you've wondered if staying quiet and keeping the peace is worth losing yourself completely. If that's you, I need you to stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. And I mean everything. I want to take you back, before that day, before the quilt, before I knew what kind of man my son-in-law really was. Because none of this makes sense unless you understand what my life was like before everything fell apart. 10 years ago, my world was small, but it was full. My husband Danny had been gone for 5 years by then, heart attack, sudden. He was only 58. We were supposed to grow old together, supposed to retire and travel and sit on the porch in matching rocking chairs like some old country song. But life had other plans. After he died, I did what I've always done. I got up. I kept going. And I had a daughter who needed me, and I wasn't going to fall apart and make her carry that weight. So I worked. I kept the house clean. I showed up to her college events. I smiled when people asked how I was doing. But inside, I was hollow. Emily was my lifeline. She called me every Sunday. She came home for the holidays. She'd sit with me at the kitchen table and drink coffee and tell me about her classes, her friends, her dreams. And for those moments, I felt like I still had a purpose. She graduated with honours, got a job at a marketing firm in the city, started building a life, and I was so proud of her, so proud I could have burst. And then she met Mark. She brought him home for Thanksgiving about 7 years ago. He was polite, quiet, smiled at the right times, brought a bottle of wine and complimented my cooking. And he worked in finance, she said, made good money, treated her well. I wanted to like him. I really did. But there was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Nothing obvious. Nothing I could point to and say, that right there, that's the problem. Just a feeling, a coldness behind his eyes. The way he'd smile at me, but it never reached all the way up. The way he'd answer my questions, but never ask me any. I told myself I was being paranoid, overprotective, that no man would ever be good enough for my little girl in my eyes, and that wasn't fair to him. So I pushed the feeling down. They got engaged a year later. Emily was glowing. She showed me the ring and cried and hugged me and said, "Mum, I'm so happy." And I hugged her back and said, "Then I'm happy too, baby." And I meant it, even if I didn't fully trust him. And I trusted her. I trusted that she knew what she was doing, that she'd chosen someone who would love her the way she deserved. The wedding was beautiful, small ceremony, just family and a few close friends. I wore a navy dress I'd sewn myself, and I cried through the whole thing. Happy tears, sad tears, all mixed together. When Emily walked down the aisle, I thought about Danny, about how much he would have loved to see this, how he would have shaken Mark's hand and told him to take care of our girl, how he would have danced with her and embarrassed her with some old song from the 70s. I felt his absence like a weight on my chest, but I smiled, I clapped, I toasted to their future. And when Mark hugged me at the reception and said, "Thank you for raising such an amazing woman. You're the mother I never had," I believed him. God help me, I believed him. After the wedding, they moved into a little apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Emily was happy. She'd call me and tell me about painting the walls and picking out furniture and planning their future. And then one day she called and said they were looking at houses. I was thrilled. I remembered what it felt like to buy my first home with Danny, the excitement, the fear, the pride. But then she got quiet. She said, "Mum, we found the perfect place, but we're just a little short on the down payment." I didn't even hesitate. I said, "How much do you need?" She told me it wasn't a small amount. It was most of what I had left in savings after Danny's funeral and all the bills that came after. But I didn't care. I wanted her to have what I had, a home, a foundation, a place to build a family. So I wrote the check. She cried, said she'd pay me back. I told her not to worry about it, told her that's what mothers do. We give our children what we can so they can have better than we did. Mark sent me a text later that night. It said, "Thank you so much. We'll never forget this." I kept that text for a long time. I read it over and over after everything fell apart, trying to figure out if he ever meant it, or if I was just a checkbook to him from the very beginning. They moved into the house a few months later. It was gorgeous. 3 bedrooms, big backyard, everything they'd dreamed of. I helped them move in, painted the guest bedroom, hung curtains, planted flowers in the front yard. Mark didn't help much, said he had a bad back, so it was mostly me and Emily, laughing and sweating and talking about all the memories they'd make in that house. She said, "One day you'll have grandkids running around this yard, Mum." I held on to that. For the next few years, that's what kept me going. The idea that I'd get to be a grandmother, that I'd have a little one to spoil and love and pass down all the things my mother passed down to me. I started collecting things, a wooden rocking chair from an estate sale, a set of children's books from the thrift store, fabric for a baby quilt I'd make when the time came. I dreamed about it constantly, but the years passed and there was no baby. And slowly, things started to change. At first, it was small. Emily stopped calling as much. She'd say she was busy with work, tired, stressed. I understood. Life gets hectic. I didn't push. But then she started cancelling plans. We used to have lunch once a month, just the 2 of us, our little tradition, but she'd cancel last minute. Something came up. Mark needed her. Work was crazy. I told myself it was fine, that this was normal, that married women have different priorities, and I needed to respect that. Then the Sunday dinners stopped. I used to cook every Sunday and they'd come over. We'd sit around the table and talk and laugh and it felt like family. But Mark started making excuses. He was tired. He had work to catch up on. He didn't feel well. And Emily would apologise and say, "Maybe next week, Mum." But next week never came. I started eating Sunday dinners alone. Just me and a table full of food I'd made for people who didn't show up. I'd sit there and tell myself not to cry, that I was being silly, and that they had their own lives and I needed to let them live it. But it hurt. God, it hurt. I started to wonder if I'd done something wrong, if I'd said something to offend them, if I was too overbearing or too needy or too much. I'd replay conversations in my head, looking for the moment I messed up, but I couldn't find it. And then one Sunday, I decided to drop by their house unannounced. I know, you're not supposed to do that, but I'd made her favourite soup and I thought maybe if I just brought it over, she'd invite me in and we'd sit and talk like we used to. I pulled into the driveway and I saw them through the living room window. They were laughing. Mark had his arm around her and they were watching something on TV and they looked so happy. I sat there in my car holding a container of soup and I realised something that made my chest ache. They weren't too busy, they weren't too tired, they just didn't want me there. I didn't knock on the door. I drove home and I put the soup in the fridge and I cried until I couldn't breathe. But I still didn't say anything, because I was terrified that if I pushed, if I asked her what was wrong, I'd lose her completely. So I stayed quiet. I smiled when she called. I said yes when she asked for favours. I pretended everything was fine, and that's when she asked me to make the quilt. She called me one afternoon out of the blue and said, "Mum, I have a favour to ask." I perked up. I was so desperate for her to need me, to want me involved in her life again, that I would have said yes to anything. And she said they were redecorating the living room, and she wanted something handmade, something special, something with meaning. She said, "I want you to make us a quilt, one that feels like family, like home." I started crying right there on the phone. I said, "Of course, baby, of course I will." I started that very night. I pulled out my old sewing machine. I went through boxes of fabric I'd saved for years. I found pieces of Danny's clothes I couldn't bring myself to get rid of. I found my mother's veil. I found the baby blanket. And I started stitching. Every night after work, I'd sit at that machine and sew. My back would ache. My fingers would cramp. But I didn't care. Because I thought this was my way back in. I thought if I made something beautiful enough, meaningful enough, she'd see how much I loved her. And she'd remember that I was still here, still her mother, still someone who mattered. I poured everything into that quilt. 18 months of love and hope and grief and prayer stitched into every single square. And when I finally finished it, I cried. I held it up in my living room and I thought, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever made. I thought she'd love it. I thought she'd cry when she saw it. I thought it would bring us back together. I had no idea I was about to walk into the worst moment of my life. The day I finished the quilt, I didn't wait. I couldn't. I was too excited, too proud, too hopeful that maybe, just maybe, this would be the thing that reminded my daughter who I was. That I wasn't just some lonely old woman she had to manage. I was her mother, and I still had something to offer. I wrapped it carefully in white tissue paper, tied it with a thick satin ribbon I'd been saving. I even wrote a little card explaining what each square meant, where each piece of fabric came from. I wanted her to understand the story I'd sewn into it. I called her that morning. "Hey, baby, I finished it." There was a pause on the other end, like she'd forgotten what I was talking about. "Finished what?" My heart sank a little, but I pushed through. "The quilt, the one you asked me to make." Oh, right, that's great, Mom." Her voice was flat, distracted. I could hear Mark saying something in the background. "Can I bring it by today? I'd love to see your face when you open it." Another pause. Yeah, sure. Come by around 3. She didn't sound excited. She sounded like I was interrupting her day. No, but I told myself I was reading too much into it. She was busy, that's all. I got to their house at 3 on the dot. I'd changed clothes twice, fixed my hair, put on a little lipstick. I wanted to look put together. I didn't want to look like the sad, lonely widow I felt like most days. I rang the doorbell holding the quilt like it was made of glass. Emily opened the door. She was in yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, hair in a messy bun. She looked beautiful. She always did. "Hey, Mum." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, sweetheart." She stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled like coffee and something sweet. Candles, maybe. It was clean, tastefully decorated. The kind of home you'd see in a magazine. Mark was in the living room, sitting in his leather recliner with his phone in his hand. He glanced up when I walked in. "Hey," he said. Didn't smile, didn't stand, just "hey," and then back to his phone. I swallowed the irritation and focused on Emily. "I'm so excited for you to see this," I said, holding the wrapped quilt out to her. She took it and set it on the coffee table. Not gently, not carefully, just set it down like it was a bag of groceries. "Do you want to open it now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She looked at Mark, like she was asking permission. He shrugged without looking up. She pulled at the ribbon, tore through the tissue paper, and then she lifted the quilt and held it up. I held my breath. I watched her face, waiting for the tears, the smile, the hug, the thank you. But her face didn't change. She just looked at it, blank, neutral. "It's nice, Mom," she said. Nice. Not beautiful, not meaningful, not incredible. Nice. Like I'd picked up a dish towel at Target. I forced a smile. "Look closer. See this square? That's from Dad's flannel, and this one is from your baby blanket, and this lace here— Mum, I see it, she said, cutting me off gently. It's really nice, thank you. She folded it and laid it on the arm of the couch. That's when Mark spoke. He still hadn't looked up from his phone. That's it? He said. Emily glanced at him. What do you mean? It looks homemade. The air left the room. I stood there frozen, not sure I'd heard him right. Emily laughed, a short, uncomfortable laugh. Well, yeah, Mom made it. He finally looked up, looked at the quilt, looked at me, and then he said it. This is garbage. The words hit me like a slap. I actually felt my body go cold, and I turned to Emily waiting for her to say something. Anything, waiting for her to defend me, to tell him he was being cruel, to stand up and say, "Don't you dare speak to my mother like that." But she didn't. She just stood there. Her mouth opened slightly, like she was going to say something, but then she closed it again. And the silence that followed was worse than anything he'd said. Mark went back to his phone. Emily folded the quilt a little tighter and set it back down. And I stood there like a fool, holding my purse, trying not to cry. "Do you want to stay for dinner, Mum?" Emily asked quietly. Like nothing had happened, like the last 60 seconds hadn't just destroyed me. I shook my head. No, I should go. My voice came out shaky, thin. She walked me to the door. I kissed her on the cheek. She barely leaned into it. "Thanks for the quilt, Mum." I nodded. Didn't trust myself to speak. I got into my car and I sat there in the driveway for I don't know how long. I stared at their house through the windshield and I kept replaying it. The way he said it, the way she didn't react, the way I just stood there and took it. I didn't cry right away. I think I was in shock. It wasn't until I got home and walked through my front door and saw my sewing machine still set up in the corner with scraps of fabric on the floor that I finally broke. I collapsed onto the couch and I sobbed. Not quiet tears, not dignified grief. I sobbed like something inside me had shattered, because it had. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Why didn't she say anything? Why didn't she defend me? Why didn't she tell him he was wrong? I would have walked through fire for that girl. I would have given her every last thing I owned. I would have died for her without a second thought. And she couldn't even tell her husband not to call my work garbage. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and I started to think back over the last few years. All the cancelled plans, all the excuses, all the times she seemed distant or distracted or just done with me. And I started to wonder if this wasn't new, if maybe Mark had been talking about me like this for a long time, and maybe she'd been letting him. Maybe she'd even agreed with him. That thought made me feel sick. I got up and went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked old, tired, small, and I thought about calling her, confronting her, asking her what the hell had just happened. But I was scared that if I pushed, she'd pull away even more, scared that she'd tell me I was overreacting, scared that she'd choose him over me. So I didn't call. I went back to bed and I lay there in the dark and I told myself that maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. Maybe tomorrow she'd call and apologize and everything would be okay, but she didn't call the next day, or the day after that. A week went by, then 2. I finally broke down and texted her. "Hey, sweetheart, just checking in. Hope you're doing well. Love you." She texted back 3 hours later. "Doing good. Busy with work. Talk soon." No love you back. No phone call. Just a handful of words that felt like a door closing. I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. I went back through old text messages, old conversations, trying to find the moment everything changed. And that's when I noticed something. Every time I'd offered to help them with something, watching their dog bringing over food, picking something up from the store, Emily had said yes. But every time I'd asked them to do something for me, or even just spend time with me, there was always an excuse. Mark was tired. Mark had work. Mark wasn't feeling well. It was always about Mark. And she always prioritized him, even when it meant leaving me sitting alone at a table I'd set for 3. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Was I being too sensitive? Was I imagining things? Was I the problem? I called my friend Doris. She's been my neighbour for almost 30 years. We've been through everything together. Divorce, death, sickness, joy. She's the kind of friend who tells you the truth even when it hurts. I told her what happened. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Honey, that man disrespected you in your own daughter's home and she didn't say a word." "No." "Then she's made her choice." "Doris, don't say that." "I'm not saying it to be cruel. I'm saying it because you need to hear it. She's choosing him over you, and you need to decide if you're going to keep letting her." I hung up feeling worse than before, because deep down I knew she was right, but I didn't know what to do about it. So I did what I've always done. I stayed quiet. I kept my pain to myself. I showed up when they needed me and disappeared when they didn't. And I told myself that this was just what being a mother looked like sometimes. Sacrifice, silence, swallowing your hurt so you don't lose the people you love. But then something happened that I didn't expect. I was scrolling through Facebook one night, something I rarely do, and I saw a post from Emily. It was a photo of their living room, new furniture, expensive looking, modern, clean lines, everything perfectly styled, and draped across the back of the couch, barely visible in the corner of the photo, was my quilt. But it wasn't being used as a blanket. It was being used as decoration, like a throw pillow, like an accessory. The caption read, "Finally got the living room looking the way we want it. So happy with how everything came together." There were dozens of comments. "I'm gorgeous. I love your style. Where did you get that couch?" Not one person asked about the quilt. Not one person knew what it meant. And she didn't tell them. I stared at that photo for a long time, and something inside me shifted. I wasn't just hurt anymore, I was angry. She'd asked me to make something meaningful for her home. I gave her a piece of my soul, and she used it as a decoration, something to fill space in a photo, something pretty to look at but not valuable enough to actually care for. I closed the app and I set my phone down, and I sat there in the silence of my living room. And for the first time in a very long time, I let myself admit the truth. My daughter didn't respect me, and I had no idea how long that had been true, or if it had ever been different, but I was about to find out. Because the next day, I got a phone call that changed everything. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, staring out the window at nothing in particular. I'd barely slept the night before, kept replaying that Facebook post in my mind, the quilt in the background, the comments that ignored it, Emily's silence. When my phone rang, I didn't recognize the number. Normally, I don't answer calls from numbers I don't know, spam, scams, people trying to sell me things I don't need, but something told me to pick up. "Hello? Hi, is this Margaret Holloway?" It was a woman's voice, professional, polite. "Yes, this is she." "Mrs. Holloway, my name is Karen Stevens. I'm calling from Crestview Legal Services. I'm an estate planning attorney, and I'm reaching out because your name came up in a recent consultation we had with a client." I frowned. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong person. I haven't been working with any attorneys." "I understand, but the reason I'm calling is because there seems to be some confusion regarding a document that was presented to us. It lists you as the party whose estate is being planned, but we have no record of you ever meeting with our firm." My stomach dropped. "What document?" She paused. "A last will and testament, dated about 6 months ago. It was brought in by a Mark Calloway and Emily Calloway. They said you'd asked them to handle the estate planning process on your behalf because of health concerns." I felt the room tilt. "I never asked them to do that." Another pause. Longer this time. "Mrs. Holloway, and I think we need to talk. Would you be able to come into our office, or I can come to you if that's easier?" My hands were shaking. "What does the will say?" She hesitated. I can't discuss the full details over the phone without proper authorization. But what I can tell you is that if you did not authorize this document, and if you did not sign it yourself, then we may be looking at a case of fraud or forgery. I couldn't breathe. I'll come to your office, I said. When? Can you come today? I have an opening at 2 o'clock. I'll be there. She gave me the address and we hung up. I sat there for a long time staring at my phone. A will. Mark and Emily had created a will in my name. Without telling me, without asking me, without my permission. I felt nauseous. I grabbed my purse and my keys and I drove straight to their house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. I just went. I needed to see Emily's face. I needed her to tell me this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, something that made sense. When I pulled into their driveway, Mark's car was gone. Only Emily's was there. Good. I wanted to talk to her alone. I rang the doorbell. She opened it a minute later, looking surprised. Mum, what are you doing here? I didn't smile, didn't hug her. We need to talk. She stepped aside and let me in. I walked straight into the living room and I turned to face her. I got a call this morning from an estate planning attorney. She said you and Mark brought in a will with my name on it, a will I never signed, a will I didn't even know existed. Emily's face went pale. She opened her mouth, unclosed it, opened it again. Mum, I can explain. Then explain. She looked down, twisted her hands together. Mark thought it would be a good idea to get your affairs in order. You know, just in case. You're getting older and we didn't want anything to happen without a plan in place. So you forged my signature? No, we didn't forge anything. We had a draft made. We were going to bring it to you. We just hadn't gotten around to it yet. Emily, the attorney said you told her I asked you to handle it because of health concerns. I'm not sick. I didn't ask you to do anything. She looked away. Mark said it would be easier if we just handled it. He said you'd be relieved not to have to deal with the legal stuff. Did you even read what's in that will? She didn't answer. Emily, did you read it? I skimmed it. So you know that it leaves everything to Mark, not you, not any future grandchildren, Mark, a man who's not even my blood. Her eyes widened. What? No, Mom, that's not what it said. Then what did it say? It left everything to both of us, me and Mark, as a married couple. That's not what the attorney told me. Emily looked genuinely confused now, and maybe a little scared. Mum, I swear, I didn't know. Mark handled all the paperwork. He said he was just making sure you were taken care of. Taken care of? Emily, I'm not dead. I'm not dying. I didn't ask for this. And the fact that you went behind my back and did this without even talking to me... My voice cracked. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? She started crying. I'm sorry. I didn't think it was a big deal. See, Mark said everyone does this kind of planning and that it was smart to get ahead of it. Mark thought. It's always Mark, isn't it? That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you made a decision without checking with him first? When was the last time you stood up for me when he disrespected me? She wiped her eyes. He didn't mean anything by the quilt thing. He called it garbage, Emily. He called 18 months of my love and my work garbage, and you sat there and said nothing. I didn't know what to say. You could have said, don't talk to my mother like that. She was quiet. I took a deep breath. I'm going to that attorney's office today. I'm going to make sure that will is destroyed, and I'm going to find out exactly what else you and Mark have been doing behind my back. Mum, please. You're overreacting. Am I? I stared at her. This girl I'd raised, this woman I'd sacrificed everything for, and I didn't recognize her. I gave you everything, Emily, everything. I worked myself to the bone so you could have a good life. I gave you the money for your house. I made you that quilt. I showed up every time you needed me, and this is how you repay me, by letting your husband manipulate my estate, by treating me like I'm a burden. You're not a burden. Then why do I feel like one? She didn't have an answer. I turned and walked toward the door. Mum, wait! I stopped, didn't turn around. I love you, Emily. I always will, but I'm done being treated like I don't matter. I walked out, got in my car, and I didn't look back. I walked out of Emily's house and got into my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I sat there in her driveway for a long time, staring at the house through the windshield. The house I'd helped them buy. The house I'd painted and cleaned and filled with love because I thought I was building something with them. A future, a family. But I wasn't building anything. I was being used. I finally started the car and drove to Karen's office. The whole way there, my mind was racing. A power of attorney. Emily had said Mark handled the paperwork. She'd said she skimmed it. But there was something in her face when I asked if she'd read the will. Something that told me she knew more than she was saying. And now there was a power of attorney I didn't know about. How many documents had they created in my name? How long had this been going on? I pulled into the parking lot at Crestview Legal Services, and I sat there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. Then I walked inside. Karen was waiting for me. She'd already pulled the file. We sat across from each other in her office, and she slid a folder across the desk. "This is everything they submitted to us," she said gently. I opened it. The first document was the will. I'd already heard about that one, but underneath it was something else, a durable power of attorney, dated 8 months ago. It gave Mark Calloway full legal authority to make financial and medical decisions on my behalf in the event that I was deemed incapacitated or unable to make decisions for myself. My signature was at the bottom, but I never signed it. I looked up at Karen, and I could feel the tears coming, but I pushed them back. "I didn't sign this either," I said. She nodded. "I thought as much. Mrs. Holloway, this is serious. If someone has forged your signature on legal documents and submitted them to establish control over your assets and your medical care, this is elder abuse, and it's criminal." "What do I do?" "First, we file a police report immediately. Then we revoke every document they've submitted. We'll draft a new will, a new power of attorney, and healthcare directives, all on your terms, with witnesses and notarization to ensure they're airtight. And we document everything, every conversation, every text, every attempt they make to contact you or access your accounts." I nodded, numb. "There's one more thing," Karen said quietly. I looked up. The power of attorney they filed includes language that allows them to move you into a care facility if they deem it necessary, without your consent. The room tilted. "What?" "It's buried in the legal language, but it's there. If Mark were to claim that you were mentally unfit or a danger to yourself, he could use this document to place you in a facility and take control of all your assets." I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just about money. This was about my freedom, my life. They were planning to take everything from me. And if I hadn't gotten that phone call from Karen, if she hadn't been ethical enough to reach out and verify, I never would have known until it was too late. "What would have happened if you hadn't called me?" I asked. Karen hesitated. If they'd brought these documents to a less scrupulous firm, or if they'd filed them quietly without going through an attorney at all, they could have used them to access your bank accounts, sell your property, even make medical decisions for you. And by the time you found out, the damage would have been done. I felt sick. How do I stop them? "We start now, today. I'll walk you through everything." And she did. We spent the next 2 hours going over every detail. She helped me file a police report over the phone. She drafted a cease and desist letter to both Mark and Emily, officially revoking any authority they claimed to have. She walked me through freezing my bank accounts temporarily and setting up new ones they couldn't access. By the time I left her office, I had a plan, but I also had something else. Rage, not the hot, wild kind, the cold, focused kind, in the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that acts. I drove home in silence. When I got there, I sat at my kitchen table and I called Emily. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Mom!" Her voice was small, shaky. I need you and Mark to come to my house tonight, I said. Both of you, at 7 o'clock. Silence. Mum, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not asking, Emily, I'm telling you. If you don't come, the next conversation we have will be in front of a judge. Another pause. We'll be there, she said quietly, and she hung up. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. I didn't cook. I didn't set the table. I didn't pretend this was anything other than what it was. A confrontation. At 6:58, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't go to the door. I sat in Danny's old armchair in the living room and I waited. By the doorbell rang. I didn't move. It rang again. Finally, I heard the door open. Emily had a key. I'd given it to her years ago for emergencies. I guess she figured this counted. She walked in first. Mark followed behind her. He looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted his evening. Emily looked terrified. Sit, I said. They sat on the couch across from me. I had my phone on the side table, screen facing up, recording. I'd learned that much from Karen. I went to see Karen Stevens today, I said. Mark's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. She showed me everything you submitted, the will, and the power of attorney. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Mark leaned back and crossed his arms. We've been through this, Margaret. We were trying to help you. Help me, I said quietly. You forged my signature on a legal document that would have given you complete control over my life, my money, my medical decisions, even the ability to put me in a nursing home against my will. Emily's head snapped toward Mark. What? She whispered. He didn't look at her. That's standard language in power of attorney documents, he said smoothly. No, it's not, I said. I checked with an actual attorney, and she told me exactly what that clause means. It means you could have locked me away and taken everything I own, and I wouldn't have been able to stop you. Emily was staring at Mark now, her face pale. Mark, she said, you told me it was just paperwork. You said we were helping her get organized. We were, he said. Then why didn't you tell me about that part? Because you wouldn't have understood. Try me. He turned to her, and for the first time, I saw a flash of something ugly in his expression. Your mother is old, Emily. She's alone. She's vulnerable. Someone needed to make sure she didn't do something stupid with her money or her property. I was protecting our future, yours and mine. My future, Emily said, her voice rising. You put yourself as the primary beneficiary, Mark, not me, you. We're married. What's mine is yours. That's not what the document says. He stood up. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated like I'm some kind of criminal. Sit down, I said. Something in my voice made him stop. Sit down. He sat. I leaned forward. I have filed a police report. I have revoked every document you forged. I have frozen my bank accounts and changed every password and PIN. You no longer have access to anything that belongs to me. And if you make any attempt at all to contact my bank, my doctors, or any institution on my behalf, I will have you arrested. Mark's face went red. You're making a huge mistake. No, I said. I already made my mistake. I trusted you. I welcomed you into my family. I gave you money, time, love, respect, and you repaid me by trying to steal my life. I turned to Emily, and you let him. She was crying now, full heaving sobs. Mum, I swear I didn't know. I didn't know about the nursing home thing. I didn't know he put himself as the primary beneficiary. He told me we were just helping you, and I believed him. But you knew something, Emily. You knew enough, and you stayed quiet. She buried her face in her hands. Mark grabbed his jacket. We're done here, he said. Yes, I said. We are. He walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. You're going to regret this, Margaret. You're going to end up sick and alone with no one to take care of you, and when that happens, don't come crying to us. I would rather die alone, I said, than live one more day being used by you. He slammed the door on his way out. Emily stood up slowly, wiping her eyes. "Mom," she said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "But you suspected," I said. "Didn't you?" She didn't answer. "When you saw that quilt in your living room and he called it garbage, you knew then that something was wrong with him. You knew he didn't respect me. Oh, and you stayed with him anyway." "I love him," she whispered. "More than you love me?" She looked at me, broken, and she didn't answer. That silence told me everything. "You need to leave now," I said quietly. "Mum, please." "Emily, go." She stood there for a moment longer, like she wanted to say something, like she wanted to fix it. But there was nothing left to fix. She walked out. I heard the car start. I heard them drive away. And then I was alone. I sat in that chair for a long time, staring at the door, and I cried. Not because I'd lost them, but because I finally realized I'd never really had them to begin with. But even in the middle of that pain, there was something else. Relief. Because I'd stood up, I'd fought back, I'd chosen myself, and that was something I hadn't done in a very, very long time. And I picked up my phone and called Doris. "It's done," I said when she answered. "Are you okay?" "No," I said, "but I will be." And I believed it, because for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to save me. I was saving myself. The first few days after the confrontation were the hardest. I didn't hear from Emily, not a text, not a call, nothing. I kept telling myself that was what I wanted, that I'd told her to leave and she was respecting that. But deep down, I think I'd hoped she'd fight for me, that she'd call and say, "Mum, I left him. You were right. I'm so sorry." But she didn't. And with each day of silence, the truth became clearer. She'd chosen him. Again. I tried to keep myself busy. I went to the grocery store, cleaned the house, worked in the garden, normal things. Things that made me feel like my life wasn't falling apart. But everywhere I went, I felt like people were looking at me, and I found out why on a Thursday afternoon. I ran into Linda, one of the women from my old quilting group, at the fabric store. She smiled when she saw me, but it was tight, uncomfortable. "Margaret," she said, "how are you?" "I'm managing," I said. "How about you?" She hesitated. I heard there's been some trouble with Emily and Mark." My stomach dropped. "Where did you hear that?" "Oh, small town. People talk." "What are they saying?" She looked away. "Just that there's been some kind of falling out, that you accused them of something." I felt my face flush. "I didn't accuse them of anything. I caught them forging legal documents in my name." Her eyes widened. Oh my, and I didn't know it was that serious." "It is?" She nodded, still looking uncomfortable. "Well, I'm sure it'll all blow over. Family stuff usually does." She gave me a quick hug and left. And I stood there in the middle of the fabric store feeling like I'd been slapped. People were talking, and from the way Linda had looked at me, I could tell the story they were hearing wasn't the truth. I found out just how bad it was a few days later. I was at the grocery store, and I saw Karen, one of my neighbours from 2 streets over. We'd known each other for years. Our daughters went to school together. I waved at her. She looked right at me, and then she turned and walked the other way. I stood there frozen, my cart half full, staring after her. She deliberately avoided me. I abandoned my cart and walked out of the store. And when I got home, I called Doris. "People are avoiding me," I said. "I know," she said quietly. "You know? What do you mean you know?" She sighed. "Margaret, there's been talk. Emily and Mark have been telling people things." "What kind of things?" "That you're confused, that you're accusing them of things that didn't happen, that they're worried about you." I felt the air leave my lungs. "They're making me sound crazy. I know, honey, and I've been telling anyone who'll listen that it's not true. But Mark is very convincing, and Emily. People feel sorry for her. They think she's caught in the middle between her husband and her mentally declining mother. I'm not mentally declining. I know that, but they don't." I hung up and I sat on my couch and I stared at the wall. They weren't just stealing my money. They were stealing my reputation, my credibility. If people thought I was losing my mind, then nothing I said would matter. No one would believe me, and Mark knew that. He was smarter than I'd given him credit for. Over the next week, things got worse. I stopped going to church because I could feel people whispering when I walked in. I stopped going to my quilting group because half the women there had suddenly become too busy to meet. I stopped answering my phone unless it was Doris or Karen Stevens. I felt like I was disappearing, like I was being erased from my own life. And the worst part was, I started to doubt myself. Late at night, lying in bed, I'd replay everything in my mind. Had I overreacted? Was the power of attorney really as bad as I thought? Had I ruined my relationship with my daughter over a misunderstanding? Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I was confused. Maybe I was just a lonely old woman who didn't understand how the world worked anymore. I hated myself for thinking that way. But the isolation was getting to me. I hadn't realized how much of my life revolved around Emily until she was gone. Sunday dinners, holiday plans, casual phone calls, all of it gone. And in its place was just silence. One night, about 2 weeks after the confrontation, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Hello, Mrs. Holloway." It was a man's voice, older, calm. "Yes? My name is Richard Brennan. I'm a friend of Karen Stevens. She asked me to reach out to you." I frowned. "Oh, why?" "I'm a private investigator. I specialize in cases of elder financial abuse. Karen told me about your situation and she thought I might be able to help." "Help how?" "By finding out what else Mark Calloway has been up to. And believe me, Mrs. Holloway, if he forged your signature once, he's done it before. People like him don't stop at one document." I sat down. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'd like your permission to look into his background, his finances, his history. See if there's a pattern, because if there is, it'll strengthen your case, and it might protect other people from him in the future." I thought about it. Part of me just wanted to walk away, to let it go, to try and rebuild some kind of peace. But another part of me, the part that was tired of being quiet, tired of being small, said yes. "Okay," I said. "Might do it." "I'll be in touch," he said, and he hung up. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something. Not hope exactly, but fight. 3 days later, Richard called me back. "Mrs. Holloway, we need to meet, in person. There's something you need to see." We met at a diner on the edge of town, somewhere quiet, somewhere I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. Richard was in his 60s, grey hair, kind eyes. He looked like someone's grandfather. He slid a folder across the table. "What is this?" I asked. "Everything I found on Mark Calloway in the last 72 hours. I opened it. The first page was a credit report, Mark's credit report, and it was a disaster. Tens of thousands of dollars in debt, multiple maxed out credit cards, a car loan in default, a personal loan from a payday lender. He's broke," Richard said. "Worse than broke. He's drowning." I stared at the numbers. "But they just bought new furniture. They went on vacation last month. Emily posted pictures." "Paid for with credit," Richard said, "or with money that wasn't his." He flipped to the next page. It was a bank statement, but not Mark's. It was mine. "How did you get this?" I asked. "I didn't, but someone accessed it 2 months ago, multiple times." He pointed to a series of small withdrawals. $50 here, $100 there. Never enough to trigger an alert, but over the course of 8 weeks, it added up to over $3,000. Who took this? I don't know for sure, but the access came from an IP address registered to your daughter's home. I felt like I'd been punched. Emily? Or Mark? Or both. I couldn't breathe. They hadn't just planned to steal from me. They'd already been doing it, for months. Richard flipped to another page. "There's more." It was a marriage license, but not Emily and Mark's. It was Mark's from 9 years ago to a woman named Patricia Dunn. He was married before, I asked. Yes, and it gets worse. I tracked her down. She lives in Ohio now. I spoke to her on the phone yesterday. What did she say? Richard's expression darkened. She said Mark did the same thing to her mother, convinced her to sign over power of attorney, drained her bank accounts. By the time Patricia figured it out, her mother had lost everything. They filed charges, but Mark skipped town before the case went to trial. I stared at him. He's done this before. Yes, and he'll do it again. I closed the folder. My hands were shaking. Does Emily know? I don't know, but if she doesn't, she needs to. I drove home in a daze. Everything I thought I knew about my daughter's marriage was a lie. Mark wasn't just a bad husband. He was a predator, and Emily was either his accomplice or his next victim. I didn't know which was worse. That night, I did something I swore I wouldn't do. I drove to their house. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the lights in the windows. I could see shadows moving inside. Emily, Mark, living their life. While I sat outside in the cold, holding a folder full of proof that her husband was a con man. I thought about knocking on the door, showing her everything, begging her to leave him. But then I remembered the way she'd looked at me the last time I saw her, the way she'd chosen him. And I realized something that broke my heart all over again. Even if I showed her the truth, she might not believe me. She might choose him anyway. I started the car, and I drove home. When I got there, I sat at my kitchen table and I cried. Not quiet tears, loud, ugly, broken sobs, because I'd lost her. Maybe not forever, but for now. And there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't save her if she didn't want to be saved. All I could do was save myself, and even that felt impossible. I looked around my house, the house I'd lived in for 30 years, the house where I'd raised Emily, where Danny and I had built a life, and I felt completely and utterly alone. No husband, no daughter, no family, just me. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I wondered if maybe Mark was right. Maybe I would end up sick and alone with no one to take care of me. Maybe this was what I deserved for being stupid enough to trust them. I went to bed that night feeling lower than I'd ever felt in my life, and I didn't know if I'd ever feel whole again. But then, the next morning, something happened that I didn't expect, something that changed everything. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of someone knocking on my door. I'd barely slept. My eyes were swollen from crying. My head hurt. My whole body felt heavy, like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I looked at the clock on my nightstand. 7:30 in the morning. Who knocks on someone's door at 7:30 in the morning? I thought about ignoring it, pulling the covers over my head and pretending the world didn't exist. But the knocking continued, steady, insistent. I dragged myself out of bed, pulled on my robe, and shuffled to the front door. I looked through the peephole, and my heart stopped. It was Emily. She was standing on my porch, alone, holding a small duffel bag. Her face was red and blotchy, like she'd been crying for hours. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wasn't wearing makeup. She looked broken. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the doorknob, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to open the door and pull her into my arms. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt too many times, was screaming at me not to. What if this was another trick? What if Mark had sent her here to manipulate me? Then what if she was going to ask me to drop the charges, to forgive them, to pretend none of this ever happened? I couldn't go through that again. But then she looked up, right at the peephole, like she knew I was standing there. And in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, she said she had nowhere else to go. I opened the door. She stood there on the porch, clutching that duffel bag like it was the only thing holding her together. Her eyes met mine, and she started to cry. Not the polite, quiet kind of crying, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, somewhere that's been holding everything in for too long. She told me she was sorry, over and over, like if she said it enough times, it might undo everything. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and let her in. She walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. I'm still holding that bag. I sat in Danny's chair across from her, and I waited. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and took a shaky breath. Then she told me she'd left him. Last night, after I came by. I frowned. I told her I hadn't come by. She looked up at me and said, yes, I had. That I'd sat in the driveway for almost 20 minutes, that she'd seen my car from the window. My face flushed. I'd thought I was being discreet. I told her I didn't knock because I didn't think she'd want to see me. She said she'd wanted to come out, but she was afraid. Afraid I'd tell her to leave. Afraid I hated her. I told her I didn't hate her. She said I should. Her voice broke when she said it. She told me she'd let him do this to me, that she knew something was wrong and she didn't stop it, that she didn't ask questions, that she just wanted to believe he loved her, that they were building a life together, and that she ignored every single red flag because she was too scared to be alone. She put her face in her hands and said she was ashamed. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I forgave her, that everything would be fine now, but I couldn't, because it wasn't okay, and I didn't know if I could forgive her yet. So I just sat there, waiting. After a long moment, she looked up and said there was something she needed to tell me. The night I confronted them, after they left my house, Mark had been furious. He'd screamed at her the whole way home, told her I was trying to ruin everything, that I was manipulating her, that she needed to choose him or me. And she'd told him she chose him. Those words hit me like a punch. But I didn't react. I just kept listening. She said he calmed down after that, and then he told her they needed to move quickly, that they needed to get access to my accounts before I locked them out completely. He'd told her they were going to go to the bank the next morning and use the power of attorney to transfer everything into a joint account. He said it was the only way to protect their future, and she'd said yes. I felt sick, but then she told me she couldn't sleep that night, that she kept thinking about the way I'd looked at her when I asked if she knew about the nursing home clause, the way I'd said she let him use me. So she got up in the middle of the night and went through his files. All the paperwork he'd been hiding from her, and she found everything. She reached into her duffel bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. She handed it to me. I opened it. Inside were dozens of documents, bank statements, credit card bills, loan applications, all in Mark's name, all showing massive amounts of debt. But there was more. There were emails, printed out, between Mark and someone named Joel. I started reading. The first email was from 6 months ago. Mark had written that he was working on the mother-in-law, that he should have access to her accounts within the next few weeks, that she was old and trusting, an easy target. Joel asked how much they were talking about. Mark said at least $200,000 in savings, plus the house. If he could get me into a facility, he could sell it and split the profit. Joel asked about the wife. Mark said she didn't know anything. And she wouldn't, that she was too scared of losing him to ask questions. I felt like I was going to be sick. I kept reading. There were more emails, planning, strategizing, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate me. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. An email from 3 weeks ago. Mark had written that the old lady was getting suspicious, that he might need to move faster than planned. Joel asked if he could get me declared incompetent. Mark said he was working on it, that he'd been telling people I was forgetting things, acting confused, that if he could get a doctor to sign off on it, the power of attorney would go into effect immediately. Joel told him to do it, and then to get me out of the house, that once I was in a facility, I wasn't his problem anymore. I looked up at Emily, and she was watching me, tears streaming down her face. She told me he'd been planning to put me in a nursing home and then take everything. I couldn't speak. I just stared at those emails, at the proof that the man my daughter married had been planning to destroy me from the very beginning. She told me she'd confronted him that morning, showed him the emails, told him she knew everything. I asked her what he said. She laughed bitterly and said he didn't deny it, that he just told her she was being dramatic, that she didn't understand how the world works, that he was doing this for them. And then he'd told her that if she said anything to anyone, he'd make sure everyone in town thought she was just as guilty as he was, that she'd helped him, that she'd known the whole time. I asked her if she did know. She looked at me with wide and terrified eyes and swore she didn't, that she knew he'd filed some paperwork, that he'd said he was helping me get organized, but that she didn't know about the debt, didn't know about Joel, didn't know he was planning to put me in a home. She was sobbing now, saying she didn't know, that she should have asked more questions, that she should have protected me, but she didn't, and that she'd never forgive herself. I sat there, holding that folder, feeling the weight of everything she'd just told me. And I realized something. Emily wasn't Mark's partner, she was his victim too. He'd manipulated her just as much as he'd manipulated me. And now she was here, alone, scared, with nowhere else to go. I set the folder down on the table, I stood up, and I walked over to the couch. Emily looked up at me, in her face red and streaked with tears, and I pulled her into my arms. She collapsed against me, sobbing, saying she was sorry over and over. I held her tight and told her I knew. We sat there like that for a long time, just holding each other, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. After a while, Emily pulled back and wiped her eyes. She asked me what we should do now. I picked up the folder and told her we were going to take it to Karen, and then to the police, and we were going to make sure Mark Calloway never did this to anyone ever again. She nodded and said, okay. I looked at her and asked if she was ready, because once we did this, there was no going back. He was going to fight. He was going to lie. He was going to try to turn people against her. She said she knew, but that she didn't care anymore. That she just wanted to do the right thing. I squeezed her hand and told her then let's do it. We spent the rest of the morning going through everything, every document, every email, every piece of evidence. And by the time we were done, we had enough to bury him. At noon, we drove to Karen's office. Karen looked shocked when she saw Emily with me, but when we showed her what we'd found, her shock turned into something else. Determination. She told us this was more than enough, that it was fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, conspiracy, that he was going to prison for this. I said good. Karen asked Emily if she was prepared to testify against him. Emily said yes. Karen warned her it wasn't going to be easy, that he was going to come after her, legally, emotionally, that he was going to try to discredit her. Emily said she knew, but that she had to do this. For me, and for anyone else he might hurt. Karen smiled and said, then let's get started. We filed a new police report that afternoon, this time with all the evidence, the forged documents, the emails, the bank statements, everything. The detective we spoke to, a woman in her 50s named Linda Marsh, listened carefully, took notes, and told me that what I was doing took courage, that a lot of people in my position would have just walked away. I told her I tried, but I couldn't let him get away with it. She nodded and said they were going to move fast, that she'd have a warrant for his arrest by the end of the day. Emily asked if it would really be that fast. The detective said with evidence like this, absolutely. We left the police station feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real, a solid hope. That night, Emily and I sat at my kitchen table with cups of tea. It felt strange, good strange, like maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. Emily said my name softly. I looked at her. She thanked me. I asked her for what. She said for not giving up on her. I reached across the table and took her hand. I told her she was my daughter, that I could never give up on her. She smiled. A real smile, the first one I'd seen in months. And in that moment, I realized something. We'd both been lost, but maybe, just maybe, we'd found our way back to each other. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Detective Marsh. She told me they'd arrested Mark Calloway that morning. I felt my whole body sag with relief. She said he was being held without bail, and that based on the evidence, and the district attorney was confident they'd get a conviction. I hung up and told Emily. She cried, but this time they were tears of relief. It was over. Mark was gone, and we were free. The weeks that followed Mark's arrest were strange, not bad strange, just different. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Emily stayed with me. We didn't talk about it or make it official. She just never left, and I didn't ask her to. At first, it was awkward. We tiptoed around each other like strangers, careful with our words, overly polite, like we were both afraid one wrong move would shatter whatever fragile peace we'd built. But slowly, day by day, something shifted. We started having coffee together in the mornings, nothing deep, just small talk, the weather, a funny thing one of us saw on TV, normal things. And then one night, about a week after Mark's arrest, Emily came into the kitchen while I was making dinner, and she asked if she could help. I handed her a knife and told her to chop the vegetables. We worked side by side in silence for a few minutes, and then, out of nowhere, she started talking. She told me about the early days of her marriage, how Mark had been charming at first, attentive, loving, how he'd made her feel like she was the center of his world. But then, slowly, things changed. He started making little comments about her weight, her job, her friends. Nothing cruel enough to call him out on, just enough to make her doubt herself. He isolated her, told her that her friends didn't really care about her, that I was overbearing and controlling, that he was the only one who truly understood her. And she believed him. Yeah, because she wanted so badly to be loved. She told me she knew, deep down, that something was wrong, that there were moments when she'd catch him in a lie or notice him being cold to me, and a voice in her head would whisper that this wasn't right. But she pushed it down, because admitting he was bad meant admitting she'd made a terrible mistake, and she wasn't ready to face that. I listened without interrupting, and when she was done, I set down the spoon I was holding and I turned to her. I told her I understood, that I knew what it was like to ignore red flags because the alternative was too painful, that I'd done the same thing with her, ignored the distance, the cancelled dinners, the way she prioritized Mark over me, because admitting she didn't need me anymore felt like losing her. And I wasn't ready for that either. She started crying, and I pulled her into a hug. We stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were really mother and daughter again. Not perfect, not without scars, but real. Over the next few weeks, the truth about Mark started spreading through town. At first, people didn't believe it. There were whispers, doubt. Some people even defended him. But then the local newspaper ran a story. It detailed his arrest, the charges, the evidence, the emails. And suddenly everyone knew. The same people who had avoided me in the grocery store started reaching out. Karen from down the street sent me a handwritten note apologizing for doubting me. Linda from my quilting group called and asked if I wanted to come back. Even the pastor from church stopped by to check on me. And it felt vindicating, but also exhausting. Because as much as I appreciated the apologies, part of me couldn't help but think, where were you when I needed you? When I was sitting alone in my house, isolated and doubting myself, where were you then? Doris told me not to be bitter. She said people are complicated, that they want to believe the best in others, even when the truth is staring them in the face. I knew she was right, but it still hurt. The trial took months to prepare. Emily and I met with the district attorney several times. We went over the evidence, prepared for what Mark's defense might say, talked about what it would be like to face him in court. Emily was terrified. She'd wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, shaking, saying she couldn't do it. But I reminded her why we were doing this. And not for revenge, but for justice, and for every other person Mark might hurt if we didn't stop him. The trial finally began in late spring. I won't lie, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to Mark's lawyer try to paint me as a confused old woman who didn't understand what she was signing. Listening to him claim that Emily was vindictive and bitter because the marriage didn't work out. Watching Mark sit there in his suit, calm and composed, like he was the victim in all of this. It made my blood boil, but I didn't let it show. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, and I let the evidence speak for itself. The forged documents, the emails, the bank records showing the unauthorized withdrawals, the testimony from Patricia Dunn, Mark's ex-wife, and who told the jury about how he'd done the exact same thing to her mother. By the time the prosecution rested, there was no doubt. Mark Calloway was guilty. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse, conspiracy. When the judge read the verdict, I felt Emily grab my hand. I squeezed back, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Relief. True, deep relief. Mark was sentenced to 8 years in prison. It wasn't enough in my opinion, but it was something. And more importantly, it sent a message that people like him don't get away with it. Not anymore. After the sentencing, Emily and I walked out of the courthouse together. The sun was shining. The air was warm. Spring had fully arrived. The Emily stopped on the steps and turned to me. She told me she didn't know what she was going to do next, that she didn't have a job anymore, that she'd lost most of her friends, that her life felt like it was in pieces. I told her that was okay, that we'd figure it out. Together. She smiled. And we walked to the car. That night, we sat on my back porch with glasses of iced tea, watching the sunset. It was quiet, peaceful. Emily asked me if I ever regretted it, going after Mark, fighting back. I thought about it for a long time, and then I told her no, because even though it had been hard, maybe the hardest thing I'd ever done, it taught me something I'd forgotten. That I was strong, that I mattered, that I didn't have to shrink myself to make other people comfortable, and that even when the people you love let you down, you can still choose yourself. Emily nodded. And then she said something I'll never forget. She said I was the bravest person she knew. I laughed and told her I didn't feel brave. She said that's what made it brave. We sat there in silence for a while longer, watching the sky turn pink and orange. And I thought about everything I'd lost. My savings, most of it spent on legal fees. My reputation, damaged, even if it was slowly being repaired. My trust, shattered in ways I wasn't sure would ever fully heal. But I also thought about what I'd gained, my dignity, my daughter, my voice. And as I sat there on that porch with Emily beside me and the sun setting in front of me, I realized something. I was going to be okay. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But eventually, because I'd survived the worst of it. And if I could survive that, I could survive anything. That quilt, the one Mark had called garbage, was still at Emily's house. A few weeks after the trial, she brought it back to me. It was folded neatly, cleaned, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. She set it on my kitchen table and told me she was sorry, that she should have defended it, defended me, that she'd been a coward. I told her she wasn't a coward. She was human, and humans make mistakes. I unfolded the quilt and looked at it. Every square, every stitch, every memory sewn into the fabric. It wasn't garbage. It never was. It was love. Imperfect, complicated, messy love, but love nonetheless. I draped it over the back of my couch, and every time I looked at it, I didn't think about Mark's words. I thought about mine, about the hands that made it, and about the heart that went into it, about the strength it took to keep going, even when I felt like giving up. And I smiled, because that quilt wasn't just a blanket. It was proof. Proof that I was here, that I mattered, that my love, my life was worth something. And no one could ever take that away from me. 6 months have passed since that day in the courtroom. The seasons have changed. Summer faded into fall, and now winter approaches. There's a chill in the morning air that wasn't there before. Things are different now, quieter, simpler. Emily found a job at a small marketing agency 2 towns over. It doesn't pay what she was making before, but she says she likes the people there, says they treat her with respect. She moved into her own apartment last month, a little 1-bedroom not far from me. It's small, but it's hers. And she's starting over piece by piece. She comes over for dinner every Sunday now, not because she has to, not because I expect it, but because she wants to. We're still healing. There are still moments when a certain look crosses her face, or when I find myself pulling back, afraid to trust completely. But we're trying. And that's enough for now. I got a letter from Mark's ex-wife, Patricia, last week. She wrote to thank me for having the courage to press charges. Said she wished she'd done the same when he did this to her mother. We've spoken on the phone a few times now, found a strange sort of friendship in our shared experience. There's something powerful about knowing you're not alone. As for me, I'm doing okay. I had to sell my house. The legal fees took most of what I had saved. But I found a little apartment that gets good morning light. I filled it with the things that matter, my books, my sewing machine, photographs of the people I love. I started teaching quilting at the senior centre on Wednesdays, just basic classes, nothing fancy. But the women who come seem to enjoy it. There's something healing about creating beauty with your hands, about taking scraps that other people might throw away and turning them into something meaningful. Sometimes I think that's what I'm doing with my life now, taking the scraps of what happened and stitching them into something new, something stronger. Last week I finished a new quilt, not for Emily, not for anyone but myself. I used colours I love, deep blues and purples, rich golds, colours that make me feel strong, colours that remind me of sunset skies and distant horizons. I hung it on my bedroom wall where I can see it first thing every morning. It's not perfect. There are places where the stitches aren't quite straight, where the pattern doesn't quite line up. But that's okay. I'm not perfect either. I'm just a woman who finally learned that her worth isn't measured by what other people think of her. That her voice matters, that her boundaries deserve to be respected, that her love is valuable and shouldn't be treated like garbage. Sometimes in the quiet evenings, when I'm sitting by the window with my tea, watching the world go by, I think about how different my life is now from what I imagined it would be. Not better, not worse, just different. And I'm okay with that, because I'm still here, still creating, still loving, still learning. And now, when someone asks me who I am, I don't start by saying I'm Emily's mother or I'm Danny's widow. I say I'm Margaret, and that's enough. So here I am. My life isn't perfect. Emily is living with me while she saves up enough money to get her own place. We're still healing. Some days are good, some days are hard. There are still moments when I see a flash of guilt in her eyes, or when I find myself pulling back, afraid to trust completely. But we're trying, and that's more than I had a year ago. I started quilting again, not for anyone else, just for me. I sit at my old sewing machine in the evenings with the windows open and the sound of crickets outside, and I stitch, I create. I make things of beauty from scraps of fabric that other people might have thrown away. And with every stitch, I feel myself getting a little stronger, a little more whole. And I look back at the woman I was a year ago, the woman who sat in her car in her daughter's driveway, crying, feeling small and used and invisible. And I almost don't recognize her. She was so desperate for love, so desperate to matter to the people she loved, that she was willing to accept disrespect. She was willing to stay quiet. She was willing to shrink herself so she didn't take up too much space. I'm not that woman anymore. I learned the hard way that you can't force someone to value you. You can't make them see your worth. You can't love them into respecting you. All you can do is respect yourself. And that means drawing a line. It means speaking up when you're disrespected. It means walking away from people who make you feel small. It means choosing your own dignity over their comfort. Blood doesn't make someone family. Loyalty does. Love without respect is just a cage, and I refuse to live in a cage ever again. I wanted to share this story with you because I know I'm not the only one who's been through this. I know there are some of you watching this right now who feel invisible, overlooked, taken for granted by the very people you've sacrificed everything for. Maybe you're sitting at a dinner table every Sunday, swallowing your hurt while someone makes jokes at your expense. Maybe you're answering the phone every time they call, dropping everything to help them, even though they never do the same for you. Maybe you're telling yourself that this is just what love looks like, that this is just what family does, but I'm here to tell you it's not. That quilt I made wasn't garbage, but the way they treated me was. And I finally found the courage to take it out to the curb and leave it there. I want to ask you something now, and I want you to be honest with yourself and with me in the comments below. Have you ever given your heart to someone who treated it like it was worthless? Have you ever stayed quiet when you should have screamed? Tell me your story, because your story matters. Your pain matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. We need to remind each other that we're not alone in this, that our experiences are valid, and that we have the right to demand respect from the people we love. If this story hit close to home, if it made you feel seen, if it reminded you of your own strength, then please subscribe to my channel. Every week I'm going to share another story, stories of betrayal, of survival, of resilience. These stories that remind us that even when our hearts are broken, we can still find the strength to stitch them back together, one thread at a time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here with me. And remember, you are not garbage. You are a work of art, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to have you in their life.